really exciting. I'm so happy that you could be here. This is Stefan. He's going to be sharing his life story with us. And please pay attention. Leave all questions for the end. If you have questions, that'd be great. Without further ado, Stefan.
Good intro.
So I had a really difficult time figuring out what I was going to talk to all of you about today. I didn't just go to a controversial mining thing in Mexico and didn't do cool stuff like that. So I figured I'd just talk about stuff that I've been thinking about and going through recently, things I value and how I came to value them, which largely revolves around the school. And also a few existential crises. I want to start off by a quote by Viktor Frankl from Man's Search for Meaning. Man's search for meaning is the primary motivation in his life. This meaning is unique and specific in that it must and can be filled by him alone. I grew up on a boat for 8 years traveling with my family. During this time, I experienced a very consistent feeling of isolation and separation from humanity and God. The name of God and humanity kind of lost their meaning. They became ambiguous concepts to my life. I spent my whole childhood asking myself why I was still existing. This question stuck with me and became an underpinning question for my life. Later, I lived in Central Florida, Toronto, and then Southern Florida, Miami. It was in these places that, despite the fact that I lived in communities, the separation that I felt between myself and God still existed to a very discouraging degree. Eventually, after a long time dipping my head in and out of isolation, I abandoned the desire to feel connection to people and God, like a little frog that once danced and sang for me but had since refused to perform. I value coming to SSU very much. I remember the exact day I fell in love with SSU. It was the slip and slide last year. Before taking about 4 or 5 quick shots of whiskey at Nate's old apartment, and then running. There were about 4 or 5 of us that flew shirtless like the most awkward, featherless eagles onto the soapy plastic. And then later on, we were having lunch, I believe, and I prayed that day for the longevity of this school. I felt in that moment a sense of unity, a sense of togetherness. I think ultimately I found this place comforting because it feeds the philosophy that I wanted to believe for such a long time, and I'm always wishing is realized. I live a very experiential philosophy. This place represents incredible value for me in this philosophy, as I believe most of all in something that I believe it represents, which is humility and her faithful partner, trust. These things have come to be the staple of my philosophy. To be humble and do actions that express my value of you over myself, and trusting enough to fully believe that if we both are humble, we will be there for one another, and the vulnerability that results. I hate to point it out, but we live in a tiny town. I also feel like people who come here find it difficult to leave, and in that way we're stuck together, living in quarters that are very close in many different ways. In order to find a way to survive, we have to find ways to make our own fun and our own ways of relating. Creativity, determination, and above all, humility and trust are required. This place teaches me to constantly how to live these two things to the best of my ability. Because that's what happens when we're Done successfully, it creates the Mack truck of relationships. It's capable of just taking any beatings, because that's what happens when we're vulnerable. And when we live in many ways closely. I haven't always done this well, and know I have much to learn about relying on people. Shelby once introduced me to a very powerful concept that is quickly transforming my conception of interrelational reliance in God: sacramental imagination. Among other things, to me, and as I understand it, it means the conscious acknowledgement of the sacredness of everything to its proper degree. Sitting outside Something's Brewing, looking at Shelby as we conversed over things that meant a lot to me, I had a moment that seemed like real vulnerability, as I thought, this is sacred. In my mind, admitting the true value of the people around us to ourselves kind of removes the anonymity between relationships, as if we had been faceless pen pals online until we decided to meet in face in this tiny school. If we can acknowledge this constantly, I believe that life's meanings and beautiful ways to live become ever more apparent. I don't believe in sin, heaven, God, necessarily, or anything else such as this. These things seem too definitive for me. I have simply come to believe that through truly honest reflection of what we value and the embracing of these values past our inhibitions, we will be shown paths that lead us to a truly whole life. In this way, you might call it God. It is what compels me to write this as truly and honestly as I can muster. This is very powerful. This philosophy is very powerful when expressed in a community as I believe it is here, despite all the faults we have. There was this moment when I was in Egypt with my family. We were taking a 5-hour road trip through the desert in Cairo. We went with the Convoy, and we were told to stick with it because to go alone was dangerous because there are lots of raiders there. Unfortunately, we had rented a lemon, and we were overheating. We had to slow down from 80 to 50 kilometers an hour. Everyone honked and passed us. The armed guards who served as a caboose of the convoy were tailgating and honking at us. Finally, they passed us until they were out of sight. It was funny because they had all these checkpoints with guards that we had to stop at just to keep out, and they made sure everything was in order, and they stopped us and took us out of our car and searched the car and stuff, and they took our passports and they realized we were Canadian, and they're like, "Oh, Canada Dry, Canada Dry." Canada Dry. So they all wanted to get a picture with us, so they got a picture of us with them, and we got a picture of them with us. The funny thing was that they spelled checkpoint wrong, and instead it was chickpoint. Chickpoint. So we got a picture of ourselves with these border guards at the chickpoint. Really funny. So we ended up driving for 7 hours, windows down, the heater on, through the desert, completely alone. The feeling of helplessness was immense. When I acknowledged the value of people in an almost spiritual way, I realized that vulnerability is realizing what you would do to keep that truck I'm riding in running, and the trucks of the friendships around you running, and the work it entails, and the fear that is involved with having to confront that work. Fixing radiators, changing fuel pumps, filters, gasket, belts, to be humble enough to let the other person try to fix it, and to be determined enough not to drive away. It kind of made the connection for me to give God a face again. His face is your face. It doesn't mean the right things will always be done, but it means that when one of our trucks are broken in the desert, and the rest of the convoy will stop and wait, assist if needed, then continue the better for it. This concept is so valuable for me as someone who knows how dangerous it is to go alone. I want to end with another quote from Viktor Frankl. The meaning of life differs from man to man, day to day. What matters, therefore, is not the meaning of life in general, but rather the specific meaning of a person's life at any given moment. Ultimately, we should not ask what the meaning of life is. Rather, we must recognize that it's us who is asked, and us who is tasked with the responsibility. And in that way, I've found that meaning in acknowledging, honestly, who I am in this place, and seeing you as you choose to present yourself, and without any judgment or ulterior motives to be present, and that maybe in identifying solely as myself rather than as a citizen or a race or part of a religion, I can identify solely as the aspects that make me truly who I am. And that in itself fills a role that is significant to myself, and that means something. Questions?
What are your thoughts, like in light of all that, just in terms, can you talk a little bit about hope, and do you see a role for hope in your journey, or reflect a little bit on hope as a motivation or as a concept?
I think hope has played a very significant role for me. It's also been a very painful one in its constant defeat and rebuilding. And it serves as something that I always seek to see fulfilled.
Stefan, what do you think about the, in North America, individualism is a really strong value. How do you look at that versus your experience of
it's funny,
belonging?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Earlier today, I forget where I was reading this, but I heard something about identifying your meaning with your society or with your conscience. And in light of my review of sacramental imagination, I felt like they can be the same thing, and that my search as an individual is the search of the community. So I think that maybe individualistic ideals they separate us a lot when we feel like that's all we can be. But if there's a way that we can be more than just, we can kind of incorporate both of them together, if that makes any sense at all.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Just
Could you say a word of explanation about sacramental imagination?
Yes, so the way I understand it is that all of God's creation is representative of His beauty in some way, and the life that we may live after, and His love, all kinds of things, and it's basically like I don't fully understand it yet. So, and Tim, wherever you are, I'm on that paper that I can read of yours so that we can grab coffee sometime. So, as I understand it, it's pretty much the representation of things in our world that exist in the next.
Okay. Thank you.
But in an imaginative way.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
Just want to throw a comment instead of a question. Just the times that we've had a chance to get to know each other since we arrived here. I just really appreciate your striving for authenticity and vulnerability. You're significantly vulnerable in the best way that you know how. And there's different people that do that. You know, it's not something that everybody does. Everyone has the capability to do, right? They can't do it honestly or muster the courage. And it takes courage to be vulnerable. And just a thank you for embracing that and an encouragement to please keep doing it. It's one of your gifts in this community. So.
It's called Windows, right? Not supposed to be opaque.
I have a comment too. I think that you have kind of an unusual background because of traveling with your family through so much of your early life and seen so much, and you have the thoughts of your parents and how they perceive the world, and to me it seems like you have kind of a gift in synthesizing things in your own way. Like I'm thinking, to me it seems like what you're saying is so deep. It feels like you have a gift to go beyond normal. At first stages of philosophy you usually read about what other people think, but you've sort of been living this thing, and you have your own way of putting things together. I feel like you've taken a leap, and I think you're gifted at this, and I can't wait to see more things that you say and do.
Stefan, so you told us a story about crossing the desert, and that was, really, and then the parallel with SSU community. But just to go back to the story about crossing the desert, and you told us kind of the comic thing about the chick point. But can you even just describe a little bit about how you felt in that time, in that convoy when you were getting past and essentially left behind and on your own?
It was really weird because, for one thing, I think the most noticeable thing was that this doesn't relate in any way really to what I was talking about, but the environment constantly was changing, and it made you feel like you were lost because you look up in an hour and the ground is a completely different color. The sand is just different. It's a completely different terrain, and also we couldn't breathe through our mouths because it would dry almost instantly. Windows down, heater off. So, and plus, like, on the desert, you have that horizon that just seems endless, and we had that before on the boat, but just being on crossings, but it's much different in a car. You can't get up and move around. You can't go down, make yourself a snack, back upstairs and see where you are on a map. You're out there on a car that is on its last legs. So you're kind of feeling pretty vulnerable